Welcome to our deep dive into a week during World War II, October 9th to the 15th, 1939, day by day, to better understand these times.
While this week might seem calm before the larger conflicts, a closer look reveals the decisions and rising tensions, setting the stage.
Let's begin on Monday, October 9th, 1939. In Berlin, as anxieties rose, Hitler issued Directive Number 6, outlining Case Yellow, Germany's Western offensive plans.
This directive detailed a strike through Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands to outflank France's Maginot Line and secure a quick victory in the West.
But Hitler's push for a rapid offensive was met with caution. Some military leaders argued that preparations were incomplete. Delay was needed.
This disagreement between Hitler and his advisors showcases the complexities of wartime leadership.
Now, from the battlefields to the Atlantic Ocean. On that same Monday, the German cruiser Deutschland intercepted the American freighter City of Flint, raising questions about neutrality during war.
The City of Flint was sailing from New York to Liverpool, but the Germans seized it, claiming contraband, a challenge for neutral nations in a world at war.
Adding to the situation, the Germans used some tactics. They painted a fake name Alf on the City of Flint and flew the Danish flag to deceive.
This heightened diplomatic tensions between Germany and the still neutral United States, showing that uninvolved nations could be drawn in.
Back in London that day, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced a new committee dedicated to preparing the British economy for war.
This committee aimed to ensure resources were used well, industrial production optimized, to strengthen Britain for a long conflict.
Tuesday, October 10th, 1939 marked a dark turn. The Nazi regime began deporting Austrian and Czechoslovakian Jews to occupied Poland.
Imagine the fear for those families, forced from their homes and sent to ghettos and camps in the Nazi-created general government, a terrifying precedent.
The general government in Poland, led by Hans Frank, became a center of Nazi oppression.
On that same Tuesday, Lithuania signed a mutual assistance pact with the Soviet Union, a significant agreement for the small nation.
This pact allowed 20,000 Soviet troops into Lithuania and transferred Vilnius, a historically Lithuanian city, back to their control. A possible victory.
However, it also compromised Lithuanian independence, signaling the Soviet Union's expanding power in the region, a strategic move by Stalin.
Also on Tuesday, in France, Prime Minister Édouard Daladier addressed Hitler's peace proposals in a radio address, a firm rejection.
Daladier argued accepting would be legitimizing Germany's actions. France, he stated, was committed to fighting for European security.
Back in Germany on Tuesday, Admiral Erich Raeder met with Hitler, advocating for the occupation of Norway.
Raeder argued that Norway was key for securing iron ore shipments from Sweden and for establishing naval and air bases to control the North Atlantic.
This meeting marked the start of planning for Operation Leopold, Germany's future invasion of Norway, showing the connection between these events.
Let's shift to a smaller event that Tuesday. British authorities intercepted the American freighter Black Gull, confiscating mail headed for the United States.
Wartime measures impacted even neutral nations. Censorship was common to prevent information reaching the enemy.
The Black Gull incident shows the difficulties of neutrality and communication in a global conflict.
As Tuesday ended, Britain took another step to prepare, launching the Empire Air Training Scheme, a partnership with Australia, Canada, and New Zealand.
This program addressed the need for skilled pilots for the Royal Air Force, a testament to the Commonwealth's role in the war effort.
Before moving on, let's note the German submarine U-40, departing from Wilhelmshaven on Tuesday for its patrol.
Its mission was to disrupt Allied shipping near Portugal and Spain. However, it struck a mine in the Strait of Dover on October 13th, a reminder of the dangers.
Finally, in the Far East, where China fought against Japanese aggression, they had a success on Tuesday, October 10th.
Chinese forces retook areas previously occupied by Japan in the provinces of Hubei, Hunan, and Jiangxi, a display of their resilience.
On Wednesday, October 11th, 1939, a significant event occurred. Albert Einstein sent a letter to President Roosevelt.
Co-written with Leo Szilard, this letter warned about the possibility of Germany developing nuclear weapons, urging research into nuclear chain reactions.
This letter was critical, leading to the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. A moment that changed the course of warfare.
In Germany, there were signs of internal disagreement. Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb opposed the planned invasion of Belgium.
Von Leeb argued that invading neutral Belgium would damage Germany's reputation and repeat past mistakes.
His concerns highlight the ethical struggles faced by some in the German military under Hitler's leadership.
On Wednesday, the Nazi propaganda machine was active. German radio broadcast a fabricated report.
This report falsely claimed that the British government had fallen and was seeking peace with Germany, an attempt to demoralize the British.
This was part of their strategy, to weaken Allied unity.
This propaganda shows how winning hearts and minds is as important as battles on land and sea.
Back to the military buildup. The British Expeditionary Force in France reached a strength of 158,000 troops.
This demonstrated Britain's commitment to the Allied cause. Even during the phony war, preparations were underway.
As Wednesday ended, tensions rose in Northern Europe. Negotiations began between the Soviet Union and Finland.
The Soviets demanded to establish air bases in Finland, claiming they were crucial for the defense of Leningrad. Finland wanted to remain neutral.
These talks were the start of growing tensions that would lead to the Winter War.
Now let's look at Thursday, October 12, 1939. The British Expeditionary Force, led by Lieutenant General Alan Brooke, accomplished a key objective.
They finished occupying their defensive line between Mulde and Helluin on the French-Belgian border, a crucial part of their preparations.
In occupied Poland, the Nazis formally created the General Government, an administrative region for the territories they controlled.
Hans Frank, a high-ranking Nazi, became Governor General, solidifying their control over central and southern Poland.
From his base in Krakow, Frank oversaw the implementation of Nazi policies, including forced labor and the persecution of Jews.
In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain addressed Parliament, formally rejecting Hitler's peace proposals.
Chamberlain stated any agreement must be genuine and not a concession to aggression, reaffirming Britain's commitment to the Allies.
Meanwhile, in the Baltic region, Soviet troops began arriving in Estonia, following the Mutual Assistance Pact.
They deployed to strategic locations, including the islands of Saaremaa and Hiiumaa, establishing bases to secure their interests in the Baltic Sea.
This significantly limited Estonian sovereignty, raising concerns among nearby nations about the Soviet Union's intentions.
Tensions continued in Northern Europe. Finnish and Soviet leaders continued their negotiations.
The talks focused on territorial concessions and Soviet military bases in Finland. The Soviets insisted these were necessary for their defense.
These discussions foreshadowed the coming conflict, known as the Winter War.
In the North Atlantic, German U-boats intensified their attacks on Allied shipping. The U-37 sank the Greek merchant ship Eris.
The U-48 sank the French oil tanker Émile Miguet and the British coaler Heronsbull. However, the U-48's captain allowed the crews to evacuate.
These attacks highlight the effectiveness of the German U-boats and the challenges in protecting Allied shipping lanes.
In Britain, authorities continued their efforts to control information, confiscating mail from the American Black Tern and Dutch Zaandam,
showing the balance between security and international communication in wartime.
Lastly, on Thursday, Allied convoy SL-4F left Freetown, Sierra Leone, heading for Liverpool.
This demonstrated the convoy system, designed to protect merchant ships with armed escorts, a vital part of the war at sea.
As we continue exploring this week, we return to Friday, October 13th, 1939. Tragedy and tension mark this day.
In the Strait of Dover, the German submarine U-40 met a tragic end, striking a British minefield and sinking.
39 crew members perished. Only 3 survived.
A reminder of the constant dangers faced by submariners.
And the effectiveness of naval mines.
Meanwhile, far out in the Atlantic, the German pocket battleship Deutschland continued its operations, disrupting Allied shipping.
East of Newfoundland, the Deutschland sank the Norwegian freighter Lawrence W. Hansen.
This shows Germany's reach, aiming to disrupt supply lines.
However, Allied convoy SL-4F continued across the Atlantic.
Safe progress was reported, highlighting the effectiveness of the convoy system.
Grouping merchant ships with armed escorts was proving valuable.
Back in Europe, amidst tensions, Germany made some changes. General Wilhelm List was appointed commander of the German 12th Army.
This reflected Germany's focus on the Western Front, preparing for a potential invasion of France and the Low Countries.
Following the rejection of Hitler's peace proposals, the German government made a statement,
blaming the Western powers for the rising tensions, accusing them of warmongering.
Part of their propaganda efforts.
And control the narrative.
A small event that day showed the complexities of war. The captured Norwegian steamer Gurmas was released from Kiel, along with its cargo.
This release, after weeks, showed the challenges for neutral nations trading during a global conflict.
In media, the BBC broadcast its first report from the British Expeditionary Force in France, delivered by journalist Richard Dimbleby.
This aimed to inform the public about their troops, and reassure them of their commitment to the Allied cause.
While the phony war continued, French forces stationed along the Maginot Line took action,
They destroyed 3 bridges over the Rhine River to disrupt German logistics.
showing they were not passive.
Across the Atlantic, American aviator Charles Lindbergh gave a radio address, advocating for American isolationism.
He criticized Canada for joining the war, fearing it would draw in the U.S.
His speech reflected the isolationist views in America at the time.
Saturday, October 14, 1939, saw a daring German naval operation.
The German submarine U-47, led by Captain Lieutenant Gunther Prien, carried out a surprise attack.
Exploiting a weakness in defenses, the U-47 entered Scapa Flow, the Royal Navy's main base.
Inside the harbor, the U-47 fired torpedoes, hitting the British battleship HMS Royal Oak.
The Royal Oak sank quickly. Tragically, 833 men were killed.
This was a shock for the British, showing the vulnerability of even their most important bases.
Prien and his crew were celebrated in Germany. The sinking of the Royal Oak was a propaganda victory.
However, the war at sea had 2 sides. Southwest of Ireland, British destroyers sank the German submarine U-45.
They used depth charges, killing all 38 crew members.
Before being destroyed, the U-45 sank 2 ships from convoy KJF-3, the Britannia and the Lochevon.
Now, to rising tensions in Northern Europe. As diplomacy with the Soviet Union failed, Finland mobilized its military.
Finland's offers of concessions were rejected, so the Finnish army, numbering 340,000, prepared for a possible invasion.
This was a critical step, as Finland faced the threat from the Soviet Union.
While Europe was the focus, Japan also made changes. General Korechika Anami became the deputy commanding officer of the Japanese army.
Admiral Chuichi Nagumo joined a committee working on improving the design of their warships.
Japan was modernizing its navy, preparing for potential conflicts.
The French heavy cruiser Duplex arrived in Dakar, French West Africa, strengthening their presence in the Atlantic.
Dakar's strategic location was vital for controlling key shipping routes.
In occupied Paris, Polish cryptanalysts continued their work, using Enigma machines they brought from Poland.
They collaborated with British and French intelligence to decode German messages.
Their work would be crucial for the Allies later in the war.
Concerned about resources reaching the enemy, British authorities detained 2 freighters, the Scan States and the Exporter.
The French detained the American vessel Nashba.
This showed the complex situation of neutral shipping in wartime.
In Latvia, under Nazi policies, ethnic Germans began relocating to Germany.
These relocations, presented as reunification, were part of larger Nazi plans.
Now, as we move to Sunday, October 15, 1939, the war continued to impact the world.
As this week continues, the war is expanding. In the north, the Winter War. And at sea, the constant threat of German naval operations.
On Monday, October 23rd, the Winter War intensified. Soviet forces pressed their attack against Finland.
The Finns, though outnumbered, continued to resist, using their knowledge of the terrain and their winter warfare skills.
The Finns were determined to defend their homeland.
They would become known for their tenacity and resilience.
In the North Atlantic, the German U-boat campaign went on. The U-48 sank the British merchant ship Harry Grey, west of the Hebrides Islands.
This attack showed the ongoing challenge for the Allies to protect their shipping. The Battle of the Atlantic continued.
Diplomatically, the League of Nations took action. They condemned the Soviet Union's invasion of Finland and called for their withdrawal.
This condemnation had little effect. The Soviets pressed on.
Tuesday, October 24th, 1939. In Finland, Soviet forces advanced, but they faced strong resistance.
The Finns, using clever tactics and the harsh winter conditions, proved to be a difficult enemy. They used ski troops and Molotov cocktails.
These tactics slowed the Soviet advance.
Out in the North Atlantic, the German submarine U-56 sank the British merchant ship Conus, west of Ireland.
Another success for the U-boats.
Back in Europe, Britain announced conscription for men aged 20 and 21.
This was a major step toward full mobilization for war.
Conscription was seen as necessary to strengthen the British forces.
Wednesday, October 25th, 1939. The war affected many areas, from Finland to the South Atlantic.
In Finland, the fighting continued. Both sides suffered losses. The Finns fought bravely, but the Soviet Union had far more resources.
The Winter War was brutal.
In the South Atlantic, the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee sank the British merchant ship Huntsman.
This was the Admiral Graf Spee's 10th victim.
The Admiral Graf Spee was elusive. The Allies wanted to stop its attacks.
Back in Europe, Britain issued a warning to the Soviet Union. stating that any attack on Finnish ports would be seen as aggression against Britain.
This warning had little effect.
The situation in the Baltic region was tense.
On Thursday, October 26th, the Winter War continued, with heavy fighting along the border. The Finns held back the Soviet advance.
The Finnish soldiers fought courageously, but their resources were limited.
The German submarine U-48 patrolled the North Atlantic, but did not sink any ships that day.
The U-boats were a constant threat, even when they were not successful.
The United States announced a $10 million credit to Finland for agricultural supplies.
This was a gesture of support from the U.S.
Friday, October 27th, the focus returns to the war at sea. In the South Atlantic, the Admiral Graf Spee met its match.
The Admiral Graf Spee encountered two British cruisers, the HMS Exeter and the HMS Achilles.
The Battle of the River Plate, one of the first major naval battles of the war.
The Admiral Graf Spee inflicted damage, but was also damaged. It had to seek refuge in Montevideo, Uruguay.
In the North Atlantic, the German submarine U-47 continued its attacks, sinking the British merchant ship Tafna.
The Battle of the Atlantic raged on.
Saturday, October 28, 1939, the Admiral Graf Spee's raiding came to an end.
Trapped in Montevideo, the Admiral Graf Spee's crew made a decision.
To avoid capture or destruction, they scuttled their ship.
A victory for the Allies, but it also showed the complexities of neutral ports during war.
In Finland, the Winter War continued. The Finns were putting up a strong defense along the Mannerheim line.
This defensive line was a symbol of their resistance.
Finally, Sunday, October 29, 1939, the Winter War continued. The Finns fought on, but the Soviet Union was a powerful enemy.
The Finns showed great courage.
Britain announced that it would send troops to help Finland.
This showed Britain's support.
This week, in October 1939, witnessed the escalation of the war, at sea and in Finland.
We've seen how these events shaped the early stages of World War II, a reminder of the impact of conflict and the importance of understanding history. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.